Welcome. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm Rich Lyons, Dean of the Business School here at Berkeley Haas. This is our Dean Speaker Series, as you know, our highest level speaker series, and I'm glad that you could join us today for this, the kickoff of our spring semester. We have some wonderful speakers coming up over the course of this semester, and we have a wonderful speaker with us today. She is one of our own, an alum of our own program. It's always a pleasure to invite our alums back home to talk to us. She has a remarkable career. I'm going to say a few things. I won't be able to do it full justice, as you know from the posting of the talk. This is Ambassador Eleni Kounalakis. She is an MBA grad from 1992. She was sworn in as ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Hungary on January 7, 2010. At age 43, she was one of the youngest people to head a U.S. embassy. Before accepting President Obama's nomination to serve as U.S. ambassador to Hungary, she distinguished herself as a prominent businesswoman as president of AKT Development Corporation, one of California's largest and most respected land development firms. She is a great exemplar of all four of our school's defining principles. She has gone beyond herself. You will see again and again. There are many examples. She served in many capacities as a public servant beyond her service as an ambassador. She was and is a staunch advocate of interfaith dialogue. She served nearly 10 years as a trustee of the World Council of Religions for Peace, the WCRP. In recognition of her work with the WCRP, she was awarded the Medal of St. Paul. This is the Greek Orthodox Church of America's highest honor. Her appointment by Mayor of San Francisco to serve as trustee of the San Francisco War Memorial and Performing Arts Center allowed her to combine her skills in business and real estate with her love of the arts. Eleni is a longtime political activist, serving 4 times as a delegate to the Democratic National Convention and as an at-large member of the California State Central Committee. We're just thrilled to have her here today. She's also on our board, our Haas board, which is a remarkable group of people, as you know. She's a native Californian. She is headed east to earn her undergraduate degree. That was at Dartmouth, 1989. She returned home to get her MBA at Berkeley Haas in 1992. She holds an honorary doctorate in law. That was from the American College of Greece. Ambassador Kounalakis concluded her service as U.S. ambassador to Hungary. That was July 20, 2013. After returning from her post, Governor Jerry Brown appointed her to serve as the chair of the California Advisory Council for International Trade and Investment. And in her time back, as if all of this was not enough, she just completed, as many of you have on your seats, her newly released book, of which she'll be speaking today, Madam Ambassador, 3 Years of Diplomacy, Dinner Parties, and Democracy in Budapest. Warm welcome to our own Eleni Kounalakis. Thank you, Eleni.
Thank you, Dean Lyons. Thank you, Dean Lyons. It is truly an honor to be here today. I graduated in 1992. And I think it's fair to say at the ripe old age of 49 that there are moments in your life when you truly feel that everything has come full circle. And sitting in front of you here today is absolutely one of those moments for me. I understand that the speaker series is about leadership. And so I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about how I became a U.S. ambassador, and then also say something about what those years in Budapest were like, why they were important, and why you should care about what's been happening in Hungary and what's been happening in Europe over the last few years. And I'm going to do this fairly quickly so I can open it up for questions. I love questions as a format because then I truly get to know that at least somebody wants to hear the answer to what I've said. So I was about 23 when I came here to Berkeley, and if anyone had said at that point that I would become a U.S. ambassador, I really would not have known how in the world that could possibly happen. You know, what kind of path that you would take to get there. And I remember being a student here, and people would come in and they would tell you their stories, and it was always very helpful because you think, well, here I am here, and this is where I might be in 20, 25 years. But what happens? How do you actually get there? What are the steps that take you along the way? So for me, in my journey, It really started with two parts of my life, and one was my business career, and I am sure that you are all set up with your fabulous education here at Berkeley, ready to be launched out into the world of business with all of the opportunities and challenges that those will hold for you. But there was another part of my life, which was essentially being what I now call an active citizen. I was always very much a participant in my local community and communities, whether it was the Sacramento community where I lived and worked, the greater state of California, nationally and internationally. That whenever there were opportunities to engage as an American citizen, which is available to all of us, and I would argue really an obligation of all of us who enjoy the democracy that we live in to participate. I took those opportunities, and largely the reason why was because I'm a daughter of an immigrant. My father came here at 14. He worked in the fields of California as a farm laborer. He ended up, by the graciousness of some lovely neighbors in Lodi, California, he ended up at Sacramento State University for an education. And he was what Bill Clinton, often describes. He says, in this country, if you work hard and play by the rules, you can make a better life for you and for your family. And he was very much an example of that. So as a first-generation American, I grew up with all of the same opportunities as any of the kids whose families had been in the United States for generations. But what was very strong in our household, very present all the time, was this incredible feeling that we were so privileged to be American, that the privilege came not just from the opportunity to work and build a better life for your family, but also to participate in our own governance. So the idea that we could campaign for a city council member, and that city council member wins, and then we could go knock on the door and tell them how we feel about issues facing our community. That is something that we knew, while many of my friends might have thought, well, yeah, okay, that's how it is. But we knew how special this was, because certainly if my father had stayed in Greece, he would not have had that opportunity as a villager to be able to participate in quite the same way as we do here in the United States. So those two parts of my life were very much the reason why this opportunity came to me. And I'm going to fast forward ahead a little bit. Our Foreign Service is unique. The U.S. State Department is primarily career officers. And in fact, if any of you came here today thinking, well, I might be interested in being an ambassador one day, I want to know, how do I do it? The fastest, surest way to become a U.S. ambassador is to get a job in the Foreign Service and start working your way up the chain of command. And I encourage anyone here who's interested to call Louis Lukens. He is your diplomat in residence. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Senegal. He is here posted in Berkeley. He's been here for a couple of years now. You can sit down and talk to him and figure out how you can go get a job at the State Department. State Department employs about 60,000 people around the world. Of them are about 13,000 diplomats, American diplomats. The rest of them are people who are not U.S. citizens that work in embassies around the world. But there are incredible opportunities, especially if you have languages, by the way. But if you have an interest in that career and that life and that kind of job, please go see him. In my situation, it was different. It is the far less likely way to become a U.S. ambassador. We have about 70 to 75% of our U.S. ambassadors rise up through the ranks of the Foreign Service over many, many years, which is why they tend to not be 43 when they get promoted to ambassador. But we also have anywhere between 25 and 30% at any given time of our U.S. ambassadors are what are called political appointees, where the president basically takes people from the outside of the State Department and appoints them to these positions. So elsewhere in the State Department, there aren't very many political appointees. There are some, but you find us in this very unlikely situation where you've been plucked up out of a different career maybe and put into the top of the chain of command at an embassy where almost everybody else there is a career Foreign Service officer. So of the 25 or so percent of political appointees, they're not all Haas graduates, business people. In fact, what you find are former members of Congress, former elected officials, people who are experts that come out of think tanks, and then maybe from a think tank or a university ends up in the White House working on policy and develops an expertise, well, comes in with an expertise, develops a more practical approach to implementing foreign policy, and then gets sent out into the field. So my having the opportunity to do this was really is something you can't really plan for. So this is part of the reason that I wrote this book, is that in many ways I felt while I was in this position that I was an outsider who suddenly the curtains of the State Department, the curtains of U.S. foreign policy opened up to me, and I walked into a world equipped with a top secret SCI clearance and background checks galore and clearances that allowed me to really see inside the way that our foreign policy is implemented around the world and the way that we gather information through our embassies in an overt fashion to be able to bring that information back to Washington, back to the State Department, which works with the national security staff in the White House to come up with our foreign policy, and then it is implemented out through our embassies again. So it took me 200 pages to describe everything that I'm going to try to wrap up right now. But if you are interested in this kind of experience, I really do encourage you to read it. And I encourage you, because you are young, you are early in your career, the average age of people who join the Foreign Service is, I think, somewhere around 29. So those opportunities are there, and I encourage you to look for them, because unlike the people who the valet is set up for, who come and recruit you, the State Department is something that you kind of have to go find. So when I was in Hungary, and I was there for 3.5 years, I arrived, and the first scene of my book is called Boar Hunt. So growing up in Sacramento in an immigrant family, they were all hunters. It was sort of the Duck Dynasty of the Greek-American community. And as a little girl, I would pluck the feathers off the birds, and my mother would cook the stew. And I'd still kept my license, and I would still do a little bit of hunting with my dad as, father-daughter experience. But I had kids. I hadn't really hunted in a while, but I got to Hungary, and part of me thought, look, this relationship between the United States and Hungary is on rails. Hungary is a member of NATO. Hungary is a member of the EU. The cooperation is so seamless. I'm going to have to go look for excitement. And so I was invited with the Hungarian military to go on a boar hunt. And I thought, sure, okay, I'll go. But the other reason I wrote about this story is because I had the opportunity to work very closely with the men and women of the U.S. military. And I feel, and I'm very open about this, that in my life I was somewhat sequestered from understanding, from regular engagement with the American military. And serving in this capacity, as the ambassador, you are the highest ranking U.S. government officer in the country where you are posted. In fact, the only person who outranks you in the country is the President of the United States. Even if the Vice President or the Secretary of State were to come, technically, though I was advised not to pull rank on Secretary Clinton or the Vice President should they come. Technically, it is the ambassador who is the top of the chain of command and directly can only be given orders from the President of the United States. So, so all of the U.S. government operations that were happening in the country were, if not directly under my chain of command, I was the superior officer. And so I spent a great deal of time with Hungarian troops who we were training, and with U.S. troops who were coming in to train with the Hungarians and then at the time deploy to Afghanistan. So it was really a very important experience for me. And I'd just like to say that if you have opportunities in your life to engage with people who have served, ask them questions. Try to get as deep of an understanding as you can of the U.S. military, because it is such an incredibly important part of who we are as a nation. And the sacrifices of our officers and their families are, it goes so far beyond the rhetoric. The actual work that they do is so important. In fact, is there anyone here who has served in the U.S. military in any capacity? Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. And it's great to see you here. So, so the years that I was in Hungary were the time of greatest change in that country since the collapse of the Iron Curtain and the liberation of Hungary and other Soviet satellite states, the disintegration of the Warsaw Pact, and the opportunity for the United States and other of our Western allies and friends to go in and to help support these countries, including Hungary, in the building of their democracy, and of their system of a free market. So within a few years of having been a centralized economic system, which I'm sure you all have studied how those systems were working and failing, essentially, and a system of government that was essentially a totalitarian regime. From that to today, and certainly to the moment that I arrived in Hungary, where they had a fully functioning free market economy, beset with some issues of corruption, but a fully functioning free market economy, and a system where the people voted on their elected representatives in parliament, and a fairly well-functioning parliamentary system, and what we call the independent institutions of democracy. So this is another very important part of any healthy functioning democracy, are these independent institutions. What do I mean by that? Free press, an independent central bank, an independent court system, and freedom of religion. Those are sort of the big ones. The academic institutions as well are part of it. The fact that cities and counties have power of decision making that's not held centrally. All of these kinds of things. And so for many years, the United States was sending trainers and experts and young people in to help the Hungarians build this system. And though there were certainly some problems with their young democracy, it was a very, very much a success story and what we considered here in the US a mission accomplished. The economic crisis of 2008 was devastating around the world. I mean, we talk all the time about the implications here in the United States, but it was devastating in Europe and in a country like Hungary, which is not a rich country where people didn't have a lot of savings. It was really devastating. They had a bailout, a troika bailout. They had to have massive cuts in government spending. Unemployment soared. Tremendous time of instability and insecurity, and the political repercussions were essentially that a man named Viktor Orban was elected with his party, which is a coalition of Fidesz and the Christian Democrats, and they were elected about 6 months after I arrived with a 2/3 supermajority. He had been in power before. He had a very clear political philosophy, and he was ready to hit the ground running with it. What did he do? He started to consolidate power back into his hands and the hands of his political allies and fellow parliamentarians. And they began what he called the two-thirds revolution. And over the course of the next 3 years, the time when I was there, which was most of this period of the two-thirds revolution, they changed, they adopted an entirely new constitution. They changed somewhere around 700 new laws. They amended the old constitution and the new constitution 5 or 6 times. There were massive layoffs in the government, massive transitions of government officers. And truly the entire system of governance at almost every level was transformed. And it was accompanied by a crackdown on free media. There was a crackdown on the independence of the court system. There was a feeling of intimidation that permeated, that caused self-censorship and people to be very worried about, if not becoming a political prisoner, which didn't happen, losing their jobs. And it was highly effective. So at the time, I knew very well the Prime Minister's political philosophy and the direction he was going. But he himself articulated it not too long after I left at a speech that made headlines. And it's his illiberal democracy speech. And he gave it in Hungarian, in a Hungarian part of northern Romania. And he basically said that liberal democracy had failed. Now, liberal democracy is not what we, and I include myself in this as a liberal Democrat in the United States. The United States political system is defined as a liberal democracy, meaning essentially, well, someone put it very well, I believe it was Abraham Lincoln, government of the people, by the people, for the people, coupled with a system of a free market economy. So this is our system, this is the system of most of the major democracies that you find, all of the democracies of Europe. And what Viktor Orban basically did is he staked out a position that the idea, essentially, of power sharing through a system had failed Hungary, and it had failed Europe. And that what was needed was stronger leadership at the top with consolidated power. It made decision-making faster and more efficient, allowed him to get things done, and ultimately served the people better. And he continues to make this argument, and it is an argument now that is catching on. Now, frankly, a lot of the methods of doing this came when Vladimir Putin returned to power and started his crackdown on civil society, the thing I was talking about at the beginning of my comments, because reining in those active citizens who are participating in their democracy, that's where you start. You stop those people. You crush the people who are out there believing that they're participating in their democracy is their right and that they demand to have a place and a seat at the table. You start by stopping those people. And so we have now seen, and of course then you also go after the media and you control the messaging in the country. So that's what we saw, that's what I experienced, that's what I write about. And since then, if you're following events in Europe right now, in Poland, the new government that's come in there has taken a page out of Viktor Orban's playbook and is starting to do some of the same things. So, so I will open it up to questions now, but let me just also say that you know, everyone's watching the elections here in the United States, and typically foreign policy is not a big part of American elections. Certainly not when it's the next president's first term. Foreign policy is always thought of as a second term, kind of the realm of the second term. But I am absolutely sure everyone in this room is well aware of how world events are impacting our domestic life in so many ways. And so I do think that we are entering into a time, Francis Fukuyama, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, declared it was the end of history. And I saw Francis down at Stanford, just walking by, and everyone's saying, yeah, the end of history, all right, here we are again, the beginning of history. But there is so much that is happening in the world. It is so important that as you pursue your careers, that you remember that as American citizens, or maybe soon to be American citizens, if some of you are foreign students and plan on staying, that it is essential for the societies, for the communities, for the civic life of our country to be very much engaged in what's happening, not just here at home, but also the events and the things that are happening around the world. Because especially right now, there are more flashpoints, there are more challenges than we have seen certainly since those dark days of the Cold War. So thank you all again very much. Dean, thank you again so much. And please, if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Eleni. Thank you very much for those comments. And as you know, these talks get a lot of exposure in our video room, which means we need questions to be in the microphone here. So please approach the microphone if you have a question. I'll ask a quick clarifying question. You mentioned bailouts, Troika bailout. Could you say just a little bit about what you meant by that phrase?
Oh, sure. Okay. So we most notably know about the highest profile bailout in Europe was in Greece, when the ECB, the EU, well, in the case of Greece, it was the ECB, the EU, and the IMF came in and basically put in place these massive multi-billion-dollar loans in order to be able to save the economy from collapsing. It was a smaller scale in Hungary, but it was about $20 billion package that was put together. They essentially could not pay their debt. They had bonds. The sovereign debt of the country was about to be defaulted upon, because in that case, the asset base of the country with the economic crisis fell so quickly and their liquidity collapsed that they essentially did not have the ability to service their own debt. And so, the IMF in particular is set up to go in and solve this problem in third world countries. And so for them to go into Hungary was really historic, and then for them to subsequently go into Greece was really historic. And they basically brought in very low interest loan and set conditions, but the conditions sort of came later, right? So it's like a lender coming in. It's actually like a really good friend saying, I'm just going to give you the money, we're going to sort it out, we're going to solve the problems, and we'll figure out how you pay me back later, right? And so a very good friend of mine, Irina Ivashenko, who was the program manager in Hungary, really had this incredibly difficult job, because the number of strings attached to this debt is really not that much. It mostly goes to how much deficit spending you can have. I mean, that's the primary way. And then there are other things like improve your transparency so that and create a level playing field so foreign direct investment can come in, and that's going to help you. It's going to strengthen your economy, and it will help you pay us back. But the conditions are not that great, and it really was essential for Hungary to be able to avoid defaulting on its sovereign debt and having really what would have amounted to an economic collapse. Viktor Orban considered this to be a violation of the sovereignty of the country, that these entities were in any way going to dictate the terms of how the central bank of Hungary would operate, how the budgets would be determined. And so he ended up, one of his strategies was, if I can stabilize the situation and show that a powerful, strong government has come in and we're going to start fixing the problems in this country, then I'm going to be able to go back to the market to sell bonds and pay off the IMF. And so that's what he did. And in the meantime, the government launched a spectacular public campaign with billboards across the country against the IMF, suggesting that they were, trying to hurt the country and dictate layoffs and pension cuts and other things to them. So it was really quite spectacular. But those are the two countries where most notably, and now they're gone. He paid them off and they're gone. And so these international lending sources are still in Greece, and it's an ongoing saga there that is compounded, of course, by the refugee crisis.
Thank you. So those with questions can approach the microphone. I have one more if there isn't one out there yet. Could you say a little bit about, here's one.
Come on up.
Yeah, come on up. You take the next one. I think there's another person
Why don't you take these
jumping
books, the extra books, and bring them in the back in case people are
that's a
reading
good
about
idea.
them.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for being here.
Sure.
My question is, you mentioned how your background looks so different than kind of the traditional ambassador. I'm just curious, what was it that you think about your background that led you to sort of be approached for that position?
Okay, well, I'll answer that question, but let me say, I thought you were going to ask me what in my background prepared me to go lead a team of several hundred experts and people in an organization that I had never worked within. My MBA from Berkeley.
Yes.
Because there's no question that the most important thing that you need to be as a U.S. ambassador, in my mind, is a manager. Because you come in and you have tremendous expertise in the embassy, and figuring out how to mobilize that expertise in a fairly strict chain of command where no one, people are very careful about contradicting you, right? I drew on my MBA more as a US ambassador going into that environment than probably I've drawn on my MBA for any other purpose, which is why I'm so grateful to Haas. But I'll tell you, it was, it is like this really kind of mysterious process where business people are identified basically by the president to go serve in these jobs. And for me, it was the fact that I was seen as a competent and ethical businesswoman, and believe me, they will find out if you're not. And it's not a question of whether or not you've ever been indicted or convicted. It's a question of how you've conducted yourself, because everything comes out in the vetting process. But then also, I was so active in my community. Everybody in Sacramento knew me. Everybody in the Greek American community nationally knew me. And everybody in the Democratic circles knew me because I always showed up. They say that 99% of anything, of success, is just showing up. And I always showed up, as you can see, because I have a broken leg right now, and nothing was going to stop me from being here today. It really matters pushing yourself to just participate, to just be there. Because what ends up happening is you learn so much from all the different rooms that you walk into, all the different meetings that you're willing to participate in. You learn, and then you have these things that you can draw on down the road. But also what happens is people get to know you. And there's no question that having people work with you and know how you operate and know that they can rely on you know that you're not going to, be a person that they couldn't have imagined. That's really important. There is a great old line from a former mayor of San Francisco. I think it was Alioto, and someone was asking private conversation. I heard this. I don't even know if it's true, but someone told me this. That someone said, "How do you pick your appointees?" And he said, "Well, there are three kinds of people in the world: people I know, people I don't know, and crazy people." So if you know someone, then you know what they're capable of, and you know what you're getting in an appointee. And so for something like this, you have to be known by a lot of people. You have to have worked with a lot of people in many different capacities. And then that really is what it is, because it is a gamble. And what they say about political appointees is that we are among the best and the worst U.S. ambassadors. So my view, and I will say this with credit to the president who I served, President Obama, is that with very few exceptions, they really did their homework to make sure that their political appointees were known people who had demonstrated experience and expertise to be able to do the job.
Super. Thank you. Please.
Hi, good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Matthew. I'm a first year MBA student. I'm a former naval officer making the transition into the business world.
Great.
I think kind of to highlight more on that previous question that was asked, or I guess rephrased, you started off talking about how you were a non-traditional, or you followed a non-traditional path to ambassadorship. Do you have any specific examples of skills or experiences that you gained here at Haas that helped you build that credibility with those that you were working with or had working for you?
Yes, thank you for asking, and first and foremost, thank you for your service to our country. I had the opportunity to work very closely with Admiral James Stavridis. He was a Navy admiral who became the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO during the time that I was in Hungary, and we traveled to Afghanistan together. We remained great friends, and he is a terrific example of a naval officer who continues to go on and do very important things in foreign policy. So very specifically, the 4 principles of Haas didn't exist when I was here in a stated form. But Dean Lyons came to Hungary to do an event with some alumni and others. And that's the first time I heard of them. And I thought, well, they're true. They're true. They're all true. They were true when I was there. Confidence without attitude. That is so important. Attitude can get you a long way. And it's good to have attitude when you need it, but it really can get in your way. I was given a briefing that we were going to have a training, an emergency training in Budapest. These happen all the time, and Foreign Service officers engage in them throughout their career. So if you're a career ambassador, you've been through it all. But essentially, they create a scenario of a catastrophe, and you sit in a room around a table, and everybody walks through what they're doing and when at at intervals of first every 5-10 minutes, to every half hour, to every hour, to every day after the catastrophe. And so they're constantly doing this practice. And I said, well, am I supposed to, am I invited to participate in this? And my deputy said, no, ma'am, if there is a catastrophe, one of our jobs will be to save you. And I thought, well, but if I wanted to sit in, could I? And I'll tell you, it was a little uncomfortable for the trainer to have the ambassador sitting in the room. I mean, the mantle of this job is so lofty that you walk in the room and, officers are trained, they stand at attention when the ambassador walks in the room. So having me in it at first, I think, was a little tricky. But for me, if I had decided that I was going to have the attitude, I'm the ambassador, I'm too big to sit in on this meeting, I'm too big to meet with, deputy ministers. I'm only going to meet with ministers and above. I'm only going to participate in meetings that are at my level. I would have missed out on the whole experience because it was in that process that really trained me. And my view was that I wanted to learn, by the time I leave Budapest, I want to learn as much as any career officer would know about doing this job. And the only way to do it is if I participated in these kinds of things. And it may have been who I was, I don't know. But what I learned here is that you could be an MBA and you could be someone who walks into the room and says, okay, I know nothing about this. Who does? How are we going to find out? Right? You have that confidence about yourself that you will allow other people to see what you don't know and not feel like you have to prove anything because you know that you're good, you know that you're a problem solver, you know that you can work in a team and not feel that you have to come out of this team project being the superstar, because if the team succeeds, you succeed, and eventually you'll be recognized for it. That is the most important thing that I learned here at Berkeley, and I've carried it with me my whole life. And what I love about the fact that Berkeley is branded this way is that now the rest of the world can see us coming and know that we're not going to walk into the room with attitude, but also know that we walk into the room with confidence and capability.
Super.
Thank you.
Super.
Hi, thanks for being here. As a citizen and a business person, I'm very troubled and feel extremely powerless about the state of campaign finance in this country. So I was wondering, can you offer your take on the state of money in politics and also offer some suggestions as to what we as business people can do about that?
Absolutely, that's a great question. This is a huge problem for us here domestically. It's a huge problem for us overseas as well. When I first arrived in Budapest, it was before Citizens United, or at least before the full effects of Citizens United. And what I would say when I talked about our system and why elements of our system were such a great example is I would say, look, I've contributed to numerous campaigns in my life. If you are interested in knowing, you can go find out. It's all public record because our system is transparent. So we give, but everybody's going to know where that money is coming from. So the transparency element of our system, it wasn't just the limits, right? It was the fact that you had to immediately report, your contributions. And that is very important part of what we were saying. So even though pre-Citizens United, there weren't caps on everything, the ability to fund campaigns with dark money, where people don't know where it's coming from, in these vast quantities with this whole industry now that's surrounding the expenditures of large quantities of dark money. It just didn't exist. So Citizens United undermined my ability as a representative of the United States to say to a country where everything, where there is no transparency in campaign finance at all, and we're making the argument, look, you can still have businesses and individuals make contributions to fund the campaigns. Do it, set up a system of transparency. And that works. And people can still give. And what happens is politicians stand up and say, okay, I've gotten contributions. You can see who they're from. But my obligations to my constituency are why I've been elected and who I'm obligated to be listening to, right? So that was the system. So what we have now is a disaster. It really is a disaster. And if you read the book, you'll see that Justice Anthony Kennedy is a very close friend of mine. And he came to Budapest twice to help as the Hungarians were writing their constitution. And, I talked to him a little bit about it after the fact. He would only talk about it after the fact. And, it's a difficult situation because for them it was this question of speech. And I think that if you were to ask Justice Kennedy. Well, now what? Look at this. This ruling has turned out to be have terrible consequences for our country. Now what? His answer would be, we have a branch of government that is responsible. It is called the legislative branch. The Congress can pass a new law for campaign finance, getting rid of dark money, in a way that is not in conflict with the Constitution, and that's what they should do. But what it does is, the Citizens United threw the ball a long way back into our court as we the people. So now what we have to do is generate enough outcry, enough outrage, demanding that our legislators on both sides of the aisle do something to reinstitute a transparent process at a minimum, and in the best case, do something to empower small donations from individuals over these massive independent expenditures. That's where it stands right now, and there are people who are trying to do it. I don't know if you guys saw Congressman Steve Israel from New York announced he was not going to run again because he couldn't do it anymore. He just couldn't spend any more of his life on the phone calling people begging for money. A friend of mine, Congressman John Sarbanes from Maryland, has written a bill. The Clinton campaign, I happen to know, is working with him to try to figure out a matching system to be able to find federal funds that would match individual small contributions, so that, for instance, the small dollar contributions in Hillary's campaign, or massively in the Sanders campaign, would be matched, so that that is amplified. So there are some things that are happening out there. Go online. If you're outraged, find out about it, and sign petitions and lend your voice, because that's where we are. We're back in the grassroots on that issue.
Superb. Thank you. Other questions? I will go with one if there are no more there, and then I think we are at the end of the time. Could you talk a little bit about your role as sort of an economic and commercial attaché, right?
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I was not the commercial attaché,
Okay.
but we had a commercial attaché.
Okay.
In fact, we had a whole commercial services office. Another great place for you all to look as you are planning your next career steps from here is the Department of Commerce. And if you like travel, Foreign Commercial Services within the Department of Commerce has jobs around the country. They are the commercial attaché offices that are housed inside or attached to the embassy. We had some phenomenal officers stationed in Budapest. You remember Rob Peasley, Marion Drain, and they're different from economic officers who serve in the State Department. So economic officers in the State Department are primarily there to analyze and understand the economic profile of the country where the embassy is located, right? And some of the things that are happening, for instance, with Hungary, being part of the EU, how the interplay is between the country that's being where they're hosted, but also the bigger world around them. Commercial services were about helping to advance U.S. business interests around the world. And there is a great deal that is happening in that realm, and there are great opportunities, both if you want to go work at the Department of Commerce as a foreign commercial service officer and go out and work in an embassy to help U.S. businesses and advocate for U.S. businesses in those countries, or if you have a business and you want to go into a foreign market, go find this person or these people, these offices at the embassy. My experience is they are incredibly talented and somewhat underutilized. And the way it works is, say you have a company and you want to go into a new market, you're going over there, you're meeting with say you go to a trade fair in Singapore, see if you can get in and go see representatives at the embassy at the Foreign Commercial Services Office and go talk to them. Most of the time they will give you advice, they'll talk to you. And if you want them, say you're bidding on some work and you can actually contract with the Foreign Commercial Services Office, and they will advocate for you to get the bid, right? And if there's more than one U.S. company that is going after the same bid, then the U.S. government, the commercial attaché office, will be there to advocate that a U.S. company is chosen. But if you're the only one, they will specifically advocate for you, with some some constraints, but you have that as a tool in your toolbox, again, that many people don't know about. And again, the quality of the people who do this work is just very, very high.
Yeah. Hey, terrific. Look, there were so many wonderful ideas here. Let me just, a few comments, right? So the idea of showing up, right? That's a powerful idea, right? She started with this notion of being an active citizen, and you get the sense, this comes through. Another phrase that I will remember, that notion, the privilege of being, in her case, her phrase, American, the privilege of being X, whatever X is for you. That's an important headset. We are proud of how you show up. Eleni, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's shut up. Just one of them. Thanks, Carrie.
And we'll